Chapter 21, The Battle of the Buried Command. February 2, 2026. Sublevel 1, Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, Virginia. The blast doors did not yield to explosives, they yielded to geometry. Maya Lin did not blow the 5-ton steel seal of the Mount Weather bunker. Instead, she used the HMS Vanguard's decrypted master keys to trick the facility's automated security protocols into believing a high-level continuity of government protocol had been initiated. When the massive locking pins retracted with a sound like an artillery shot, the air that rushed out smelled of stale military rations, floor wax, and raw panic. Go! Go! Weapon status, green, but non-lethal if possible. Captain Mark Vance ordered, his voice echoing down the fluorescent-lit concrete tunnel. They charged into the complex in a tight stack formation. But the resistance they met wasn't the mindless, shambling horde of the European plains. It was the heavily armed, highly trained remains of the 4th Infantry Division. Intruders on Sublevel 1, a voice screamed from behind a sandbag fortification 50 yards down the hallway. A hail of 5.56mm rounds tore through the air, chipping fragments of concrete from the walls. Vance dove behind a heavy steel distribution box, his rifle pulled tight to his chest. General Vance, a voice boomed over the bunker's intercom system. It wasn't addressing Mark. It was addressing his father, a man who had died in the first weeks of the London outbreak. The automated systems were pulling from old records. Cease fire. You are disrupting a critical national defense operation. Project Orion is at T-12 minutes to launch. We aren't here to fight you. Mark yelled down the corridor, his voice cutting through the ringing echoes of the gunfire. I'm Captain Mark Vance, Special Forces. I have Dr. Elena Vance and the genetic blueprint of the virus's self-destruct trigger. Your nuclear strike on the Grand Canyon will trigger the Yellowstone caldera. You're going to crack the continent. The continent is already dead, Captain, the voice of General Arthur Vance, no, General Arthur Bradley, the sector commander, roared back through the speakers. The satellite sweeps show the biomass in the canyon is changing structure. It's forming a throat, Vance. It's going to broadcast. If that frequency reaches deep space, whatever is coming out there will arrive before the spring thaw. We are wiping the slate clean. Behind the sandbags, 2 soldiers moved to flank them. But before they could clear their cover, Sergeant Miller dropped a flashbang grenade perfectly between their positions. A blinding white flash and a deafening report neutralized the hallway. Vance vaulted the sandbags, his heavy boots pinning the first soldier to the floor while his rifle barrel locked onto the chin of the second. Lin! Get to the terminal! Vance barked. Elena, identify the link. Chapter 22, The Hyperobject. While the firefight raged in the concrete bowels of Virginia, the reality at the Grand Canyon defied human comprehension. A lone scout team from the 10th Mountain Division, stationed on the glass skywalk of the canyon rim, was no longer human. They were statues of flesh. Their fingers were welded to their binoculars, their eyes wide and weeping blood as they stared down into the mile-deep chasm. The Grand Canyon was no longer stone. 150 million bodies had migrated from the American West, throwing themselves into the canyon over a 3-month period. Under the influence of the sovereign frequency, their cellular structures had melted, recombining into a single, macroscopic organ that spanned the entire length of the geological fault. It was a lung. A throat. A vocal cord made of muscle, bone, and calcified tissue. The Colorado River had been dammed by a massive wall of living bone, its water diverted to cool the pulsing, hypermetabolic heart of the structure. The walls of the canyon were lined with millions of exposed rib cages, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic respiration that pulled the freezing winter air deep into the earth. At the center of the gorge, a mile-wide circular aperture had formed a black, wet void lined with teeth and exposed nerves that pointed directly toward the sky. The neon-violet lattice in the atmosphere was twisting, forming a massive, electromagnetic funnel that pointed down into the mouth of the canyon. The structure was preparing to scream. The sound wouldn't travel through the air, it was an ultra-low-frequency gravitational wave designed to punch through the vacuum of space, a lighthouse beacon for the ancient architects drifting in the dark. It's beautiful," the scout sergeant muttered through his radio, his consciousness slipping away into the collective network as the frequency rewrote his brainwaves. The sky, it's opening. Chapter 23, The Three-Body Protocol. February 2, 2026. The main command center, Mount Weather. The glass doors of the operations room shattered as Vance drove the butt of his rifle through the lock. Inside, a dozen officers stood frozen around the central war room table. In the center of the room, a massive digital countdown timer glowed red. Orion initiation, 3:14. General Bradley stood at the primary console, his hand hovering over the physical dual-key mechanism that would launch 20 tactical nuclear weapons into the heart of the American continent. His face was gaunt, his pupils dilated into the same thin rings that Eris Thorne had possessed in the London subway 3 months ago. He wasn't infected by the virus. He was infected by the idea of it. The frequency had bypassed his blood, entering through his ears, rewriting his logic until the destruction of the world seemed like the only rational solution. "Step away from the console, General," Mark Vance said, his rifle aimed directly at the center of Bradley's chest. "You don't understand the scale of the architecture, Mark," Bradley said, his voice flat, devoid of human inflection. "The virus isn't a disease. It's a language. The universe doesn't tolerate silence. It populates. We are just the clearing of the ground. Maya. Now." Vance roared. Maya Lin dove beneath the secondary technician's console, cutting through the heavy fiber optic cables with her combat knife and forcing her tablet directly into the primary orbital array uplink. "The Orion missiles are hardwired." Maya screamed, her fingers flying across her screen as the countdown hit 1:45. "I can't stop the launch sequences from here. The General's terminal has absolute priority lock. Elena." Vance called out, keeping his eyes on Bradley. "How do we deploy the kill switch?" Elena Vance rushed to the secondary console, her waterproof drive clicking into the port. "If the missiles launch, they will hit the canyon during the broadcast phase. The combination of nuclear energy and the gravitational wave will amplify the frequency 1,000 times over. It will fry every human brain on Earth within minutes." She looked up at her brother, her eyes filled with a desperate, tragic certainty. "We don't stop the missiles, Mark. We retarget them." Mark frowned. "Where?" "The orbital transmitters," Elena said. "The defense satellites directly above the canyon that are routing the cosmic signal from space. If we use the Orion missiles to blow the satellite array, we break the mirror. The cosmic signal will bounce off the atmosphere, and the Grand Canyon structure will have nothing to receive. The network will go dark permanently. But that leaves the biomass in the canyon alive." Miller yelled from the doorway. "Without the spaceborne blueprint, the biomass will lose its structural cohesion," Elena explained. "It will turn back into inert, dead tissue within an hour. Just like the pyramid in the North Sea." General Bradley smiled, a cold, empty movement of his lips. "The satellites are armored, Doctor. The code won't let you target them." The countdown hit 0:30. Mark Vance stepped forward. He didn't fire his rifle. He dropped the weapon, closed the distance between himself and the general, and grabbed Bradley by his collar. With his free hand, he slammed his hand onto the general's hand, forcing the physical key to turn at the exact moment Maya bypassed the internal guidance firewall on her tablet. "We aren't asking for permission, General," Mark growled. The countdown hit 0. Beneath the mountains of Virginia, 20 silos groaned as the automated hatches blew open. The Project Orion nuclear pulse missiles erupted into the winter sky, their rocket motors painting 20 white streaks across the neon violet clouds. But they didn't turn west toward the Grand Canyon. They turned straight up, their guidance fins locking onto the coordinates of the low-orbit satellite array, carrying the final execution code directly into the face of the stars. Chapter 24. The Blinding Cradle. February 2, 2026. Exosphere, low Earth orbit. The 20 missiles did not drop from the sky, they tore the sky apart. 300 kilometers above the ionized, purple clouds of the American continent, the defense satellites of the orbital array hung like silver spiders against the black velvet of space. They were pulsing, their high-wattage relays glowing with the violet signature of the sovereign frequency, funneling the data stream from the outer rim directly down into the waiting throat of the Grand Canyon. Then came the fire. Because there was no air in the vacuum of space, the detonations of the Orion tactical warheads did not create mushroom clouds or echoing booms. Instead, they manifested as 20 silent, blinding spheres of pure, incandescent white light. The thermal radiation instantly vaporized the aluminum and titanium hulls of the satellite network. The delicate quantum transceivers melted into droplets of floating slag. But the true weapon wasn't the heat, it was the electromagnetic pulse, EMP. A massive, hyper-concentrated wave of electromagnetic energy, supercharged by the Lazarus digital execution code, rippled outward. It slammed into the upper atmosphere, colliding with the neon violet lattice that wrapped around the Earth. To the survivors on the ground, it looked as if the universe had pulled a cosmic trigger. The purple sky flashed white, a blinding, clean brilliance that illuminated every mountain peak, every ruined city, and every dead ocean for thousands of miles. Then, the sky went black. Not the choking, soot-filled black of the apocalypse, but the natural, deep, star-littered darkness of a normal winter night. The lattice was gone. The mirror was shattered. Chapter 25, The Great Uncoupling. February 2, 2026. The rim of the Grand Canyon, Arizona. In the depths of the gorge, the mile-wide throat was opening to scream its final, gravitational beacon into the dark. The structural ribs were fully expanded, the massive biological lung drawing in millions of cubic feet of freezing air, the vocal cords vibrating with enough kinetic force to register as a magnitude 6.5 earthquake across the tectonic plate. Then, the satellite feed died. The structural template. The constant, microscopic blueprint that the cosmic signal was downloading into the virus vanished within a millisecond. The reaction was catastrophic. Without the external data framework holding the macroorganism together, the Lazarus cells lost their structural memory. The virus didn't just die, it forgot how to be cohesive. The giant vocal cords split down the middle with a wet, tearing sound that echoed across the desert like a dying thunderclap. The mile-wide throat collapsed inward, the millions of tons of fused biomass instantly losing its muscular tension. The cell walls liquefied. The calcified bone structures crumbled into fine, gray dust. The Colorado River, freed from the biological dam that had choked it for months, came roaring back down the canyon floor, a massive wall of white water washing away the dissolving remains of the hive mind. On the skywalk above, the soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division blinked. The violet fire in their eyes flickered, faded, and died, leaving their pupils dilated but human. The scout sergeant dropped his binoculars, his hands shaking violently as he looked down into the canyon. He didn't see a living god anymore. He just saw a deep, rocky gorge filled with rushing water, ancient stone, and the quiet, freezing wind of an Arizona winter. He sank to his knees, his face wet with tears, but his mind was his own again. Chapter 26, The Ashes of February. February 2, 2026. The Command Center, Mount Weather. Inside the bunker, every monitor, glass console, and fluorescent tube blew out simultaneously as the EMP bled through the mountain's shielding. The darkness was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Then, the low, mechanical click-clack of the emergency diesel generators kicked in, bathing the war room in the dull, amber glow of analog safety lights. General Bradley stood frozen at the main console, his hands still clamped beneath Mark Vance's iron grip. The key was turned, the launch was complete, but the empty, mathematical cadence in his eyes had vanished. His pupils were normal. He looked at the shattered glass of the consoles, then down at Mark's scarred face, his expression shifting from cold calculation to a profound, crushing confusion. What did I do?" Bradley whispered, his voice cracking with the fragile weight of a human old man. "The coordinates. I targeted the array." Mark slowly released the general's collar, stepping back as his lungs dragged in the cool, filtered air of the bunker. He didn't answer. He turned to look at the secondary technician's desk. Maya Lin was slumped over her cracked tablet, her breathing shallow but steady. Her skin was pale, but the black, spiderweb veins that had begun to creep up her jawline during the ascent had faded into faint, gray shadows. Beside her, Elena Vance was already pulling the data drive from the dead port, her hands shaking but her jaw set tight. "It's over," Elena said, her voice barely a breath in the dim room. "The network is down. The virus is completely uncoupled. The isolated resurgent on the surface, they won't form hordes anymore. They are just dead tissue now. Nature will take care of the rest." Mark Vance walked over to the heavy steel doors, looking out into the long, concrete corridor where the soldiers of the 4th Infantry were slowly picking themselves up from the floor, their weapons lowered, their eyes clear. He slung his 416 Hong Kong dollars rifle over his shoulder, not because the war was over, but because the nature of the war had changed. "We have 40 miles of mountain to hike back to the sub," Mark said, looking back at his sister and Maya. "And then we have a world to rebuild." Epilogue, The Blue Horizon. May 14, 2026. The North Atlantic Ocean. Coordinates, 64 degrees 8 minutes north, 21 degrees 56 minutes west, off the coast of Iceland. The morning sun broke over the horizon, painting the cold waters of the North Atlantic in deep shades of gold and blue. The sky was clear, a brilliant, unionized blue that humanity hadn't seen clearly since the autumn of the ashes. The HMS Vanguard sat stationary on the surface, its black hull catching the morning warmth. On the forward deck, a small agricultural container had been bolted down, carrying the first green shoots of winter wheat grown from seeds salvaged from the Svalbard Global Seed Vault 2 months prior. Captain Mark Vance stood on the bridge sail, a pair of analog binoculars raised to his eyes. Through the lenses, the rugged, volcanic coastline of Iceland was visible. There were no lights, no smoke from burning cities, and no columns of the dead marching into the sea. There was only the quiet, majestic movement of the waves against the black basalt cliffs. Below deck, the submarine's long-range radio array, now completely free of the cosmic static, emitted a soft, rhythmic beep. It wasn't a frequency from deep space. It was a manual Morse code signal, originating from a survival colony in Nuuk, Greenland. "We are here. The soil is clean. Send data." Elena Vance stepped out onto the deck beside her brother, her lab coat flapping in the salt wind. She held a physical logbook in her hands, its pages filled with the genetic blueprints of a new, clean human lineage, one where the dormant macro routines had been systematically edited out using the Vanguard's medical bay arrays. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" Mark asked without lowering the binoculars, his eyes fixed on the empty space above the northern horizon. "The ones who sent the seed?" Elena looked up at the stars, which were just beginning to fade into the dawnlight. "They might," she said softly. "The automated fleet is still out there in the Oort cloud, drifting. But the beacon is gone, and the target didn't clear. To them, Earth is just a silent rock again. We bought ourselves a few thousand years, Mark." Mark lowered the binoculars, a faint, genuine smile breaking through the dynamic lines of his scarred face for the first time in years. He turned toward the hatch, ready to head back down into the iron belly of the ship that had saved them. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready next time," he said. The hatch clicked shut, and the HMS Vanguard engaged its electric drives, leaving a clean, white wake behind it as it sailed toward the new dawn of a quiet world.